You know what that is? Simply lovely. I tell you that.
The Interlagos track yet again provided a legendary race with so many moments. This GP lasted for a long time, but gave us a historic drive by the one and only the Lion, Max Verstappen. The Alpine drivers put in an incredible race, with Liam Lawson also defending off a 7-time world champion, and Sergio Perez for plenty of the race. It was constantly on that level that the driver was making the difference. The cars here didn't really matter much. It was down to who had the balls to stick it in and provide amazing lap time, lap after lap after lap. And Max Verstappen showed why he is a world champion, soon to be 4 times. The start of this Brazil weekend was quite incredible on Friday. Saturday had quite the sprint, but Sunday in itself could be talked about for ages because of the qualifying that we had with 5 different red flags, so many drivers hitting the wall. Alex Albon couldn't even participate. The Aston Martin drivers had to repair, be real MVPs, and actually get the cars back into place. It was havoc from the start of Sunday, but then we get into the race weekend and where it all unfolds. We finally set up for a formation lap after all these delays. We're finally going to go racing at a very early time for a typical Brazil GP. And then Lance Stroll ends up locking up his rears, goes off, which, okay, sure, you can hydroplane, it happens to the best of us, but then he pulls off an amazing move on the gravel and gets locked in. Now that was quite a way to start, but that ends up actually confusing most of the grid. Now the grid is like, okay, do we do another formation lap? Is it an aborted start? We don't know. Lando Norris ends up actually taking another formation lap, even though it did end up saying on that screen that it was an aborted start, which typically works in a red flag fashion. All the cars stay, they don't go for a formation lap, and they wait for Lance to actually get off the track before they can actually do a race start. Now, this actually ends up delaying the race for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then there's a lot of controversy going around who should actually be penalized. A lot of the drivers actually ended up going off the line because of it. It was quite the interesting moment, but we still have no confirmation on what's going to happen this. I guess there's still a possibility of certain drivers getting penalties. We'll have to see. But then we finally get to those final preparations in a proper formation lap with Lando leading the race in P1, which then leads us into lap 1 and in Lando fashion ends up losing it to George Russell right into turn 1. Quite the impressive move and actually a very good GP from George in comparison to his teammate. He had quite the outstanding start, kept it up until a certain strategy blunder. But the real awesome move that we see is Max Verstappen going on the outside, pretty much recreating the exact move he made in 2016 on Nico, but he ends up doing it on 3 or 4 different cars. It was a beauty to watch. That was the real magic on lap 1. We also end up getting Checo spinning out on lap 1, while Verstappen ends up charging up to positions. Same with Lewis. Both these drivers actually had a great start, showed off those legendary skills in the rain. But then right on lap 2, Max goes for a very slick dive on Lewis in very slick conditions into turn 1, getting the move done and getting himself up to P10, so making up 7 positions right off the start. It was incredible to watch. Which then sets up our order going into lap 8. We're going to skip a little bit because it's kind of standstill here. Verstappen does actually end up making a couple of places on Alonso and Gasly. Russell is your P1, Norris, Yuki, Ocon, Leclerc, Lawson, Piastri, and then we got Max, Alonso, and Gasly. But the rain is continuing to fall and Max is continuing to make up overtake after overtake and beautiful positioning of the car, perfect on the traction that he needed to set up these moves. In down turn 1, he goes on Oscar Piastri, who's been having a very off Sunday, continues to be on a pretty bad streak regardless of the sprint on Saturday. And in unison, one of his biggest rivals, Lewis, ends up going off on turn 13. That car definitely was set up a bit more stiff, I think, than Russell's, and that was just not working out for Lewis, who had a lot of bouncing. So did Alonso. Their cars were not placed right, and that resulted in Lewis going off on turn 12 a lot. It definitely wasn't a Lewis Hamilton weekend in a track that he's typically amazing in. But then this set up a quite interesting battle between Ocon, Leclerc, and Verstappen, which you would not expect these three drivers to be in this specific order as well. Max is then caught behind Leclerc for a good amount of laps. Leclerc is actually doing a good job defending, but he's not really gaining too much pace. But these intermediates are starting to fall off. Leclerc ends up pitting, and the smart teams like Red Bull and Alpine end up actually staying out, which ends up becoming an insane play for later on in the race. But what happens is Lando Norris and George Russell actually both pit for intermediates. George still gets it in front, but Lando makes a nice move, and probably the best part of his GP was making that move on George Russell and getting into what should have been preliminary P1, but we'll have to talk about what happens very soon. The rain is now hammering down even harder, and Hülkenberg spins off the track, ends up actually getting black flagged. Could you believe that a black flag happened in Formula One? Pretty insane, but just to tell you guys why it was a black flag and why he was not allowed to continue, the actual marshals helped him get himself back onto the track and use the car. That was the reasoning for the black flag. He's not allowed to get any outside help to start up the car and go back into the race, so they ended up giving him a flag that we haven't seen in a very long period of time. This then ends up resulting in a full safety car because of Nico. Then the order is quite a unique one with Ocon, who was 7 seconds ahead during this big blast of rain. Ocon had incredible pace. Max was kind of just keeping it on track in P2. Then it's Gasly. Then it's Russell, who ended up actually getting back in front of Lando because of a mistake Lando made. So then Lando's fit. Yuki, Leclerc, Piastri, Alonso, and Lewis are your top 10. And while the safety car is going around, Colapinto puts it into a wall. It was a rough weekend for him as well. A lot is also riding on his shoulders. It was a tough weekend for him to come in with the tragedy that did happen right before this race weekend. So understandably so, Colapinto didn't have his greatest GP, but it was quite the mess for these mechanics in Williams. They have to repair this car a lot of times, and they weren't even able to repair Alex Albon's car in time because of the damage. So yet again, more repairs back over there for the Williams team. This then gives us a red flag. So now we gotta wait more patience on this Brazil GP. This felt like we were watching Oppenheimer, some 3-hour movie. That's literally what it felt like, but the wait was worth it every single time because when these cars were racing, it was fun. What's incredible is in this meantime, in 32 laps, Max has gone from P17 to P2. And sure, you can talk about a little bit of luck, but mainly these were overtakes that he made on track, and it was phenomenal watching this. It was class. He was a step above the rest, and no driver was even comparable on him in this day. He did not have the fastest car, but he sure as hell made it look like it was. We're racing again, and Ocon takes the lead into turn 1 and actually has a very good restart. He was very smart here. He knew that the Red Bull was faster in the corners, but if he got a good start off the line, he could stay ahead, and Ocon did a good job, ends up actually leaving Verstappen a little bit in the dust for a bit. But then Lando makes another mistake, and George ends up pouncing onto him, even though Lando made a nice overtaking move a little bit before this. And this is where the race starts to get chaotic even more. Behrman ends up actually going into the wall. He had quite the eventful GP. He hit pretty much every barrier you could think of in Brazil, but he still ended up actually making it out on top in front of a couple of drivers. And that was a fight with Sainz, but then on lap 40, Carlos ends up taking a visit to the barrier, hitting that on lap 40, another safety car, more time for us to wait, even longer GP. Carlos tried to get out, but to no avail. The safety car comes out, it's lap 42, and we go racing on lap 43 off of the safety car. And Max makes a beautiful lunge on the inside, taking P1, and Lando ends up sliding, and this GP is just going further and further away from Lando. That pressure was getting to the man, and it was clear to see. The now race leader, Max, is now about to make a big gap on the rest of the field. In the meantime, there is some fighting somewhere in that midfield for that P10 position. Lewis didn't have a great race, but he did make a nice move on Perez, because he actually ended up using that Lawson and Perez fight to his advantage and set up a great move. Lawson was incredible. The Kiwi is just great, and I really love him as a driver. I've became a big fan of Liam Lawson. And for the rest of this race, you're going to see fastest lap 17 times by Max Verstappen. Historic drive. He looked unstoppable. This, to me, solidified himself as a 4-time world champion this year. No matter what happens in Vegas, Qatar, or Abu Dhabi, this was a drive that you could say Senna could have pulled off back in his day. It was beautiful. What he was able to do in that car looked inhuman in comparison to the rest of the grid. Max Verstappen, you are incredible. What a drive, man. But that's not to take away from the double podium that Alpine ended up pulling off. I mean, what? Alpine, the P9 constructors car, is now P6 in the constructors because of Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon? This was a drive from both of them that was incredible. P13 to P3 for Gasly, and Ocon started in P4, but he kept the positions. I mean, wow. My hands off to Alpine. Ocon potentially could have won the race if they didn't have another safety car reset. At some point, he was leading Max by 4 seconds, so that guy was unstoppable as well today. And finally, the drought of Max Verstappen winning is gone. The guy had his national anthem play, probably the national anthem that we've heard most in our lifetimes. That Netherlands anthem played, and Max fully deserved it. We could hear the emotion from both the Alpine drivers and from Max. This was your classic Interlagos Brazil GP. Man, was it fun. What a race. I think this is probably going to go down as one of Max's best drives. P17 to P1. This guy is the Sao Paulo king. I mean, like, what he's been doing on this track since 2016 to now, it's been impressive to say the least, and he just knows this track inside and out. Give him a little bit of rain, this guy turns into prime Senna. He's a man on a mission in the rain. Quite impressive by Max. Love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. What did you guys think? We were in for a fun day. For Formula One fans, this was what, like 6 hours of entertainment pretty much for us, so I'll take that any day of the week. I'll take us qualifying on Sunday if this is what we end up getting. Love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Please leave a like, subscribe. It would mean the world. And peace.